This is Adele Siegelman, author of Arthur Elrod, Desert Modern Design, and I listen to U.S. Modernist Radio because it makes me feel smart.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. In a world before the internet, World's Fairs were the killer app of the 19th and much of the 20th centuries. Countries would assemble at a central place for about 6 months and build pavilions. These pavilions would showcase each nation's technology, culture, and national sources of pride and symbols, heroes and achievements. If you've ever been to Epcot at Disney World, you get the general idea. Much of the World's Fair architecture was forward-thinking and very modernist. But in New York, after not one but two World's Fairs in the 20th century, only a few buildings on the New York Fairgrounds survive today, some of them barely. Today, we welcome to the show two New York World's Fair superfans who've been working over 10 years to restore what's left. And now, to talk to him, the guy who lost 7 pounds subsisting only on vodka martinis and party appetizers, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hi, folks. So maybe I'll write a book, which will certainly be a bestseller, which will get me on Dr. Oz, I hope. I doubt he'll be very cordial, as my diet plan has no nutritional basis in science, although it tastes fabulous, I've got to say. As the expression goes, don't try this at home. Try it only in Palm Springs during Modernism Week.
I get it, yep.
It's the Modernism Week diet. All you have to do is, A, go to Modernism Week, and 2, just start looking around at all the incredible things. There's just not enough time to sit down to eat, which is how this diet came about. One's best chance at surviving is the array of incredibly wonderful parties and amazing modernist houses each evening, featuring martinis, the dominant cocktail of modernism, and an array of tasty appetizers. I don't know if it's because that's one big meal a day or the fact that you eat it standing up.
That's it.
But I lost 7 pounds and I feel great. Take that, Jillian Michaels. If you'd like to hang out with U.S. Modernist on our next trip to Modernism Week 2021, get on our newsletter list at usmodernist.org.
That's next February, right?
Yeah, right.
Got it.
In related appetizer news, there's a lovely scene from the movie Mermaids where Cher and Winona Ryder and Christina Ricci dance joyfully around the kitchen, preparing to eat only appetizers. It's just flat out adorable. Even if you're not a Cher fan, you're going to love this. So watch it on YouTube. Support for U.S. Modernist Radio comes from Nichiha.com/US Modernist and Modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In an adventure we are largely making up, Angela Roll was in the CIA science lab, washing beakers from another day of converting peanut butter into jet fuel, when suddenly a beaker of the thick brown goo broke, cutting her arm and covering her in highly classified chemicals, not even available on eBay or Etsy, as a warm glow came over her and soft violin theme music mysteriously began to play from somewhere. She realized she had a superhero origin story. As she passed modernist houses, she instantly knew the right market value of each house, including how to fix them up, and now she had superpowers. As Market Girl, Angela could predict modernist sales pricing with laser focus. Although ridiculed by other superheroes who could fly or be invisible or shoot lasers out of their eyes, Angela put her powers to work closing sale after sale, combining her architecture training, which is not a made-up thing, and advising modernist buyers and sellers on pricing strategy, also how to bid on the prices right.
Very useful.
Angela Roll is your special agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL, or call her 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
The 1964 New York World's Fair held over 140 pavilions and 110 restaurants, with participation by 80 nations, 24 states, and about 45 corporations. The 646 acres in Queens had the theme of peace through understanding, symbolized by a 12-story stainless steel model of the Earth called the Unisphere, built on the foundation of the Perisphere from the 1939 World's Fair. The 64 event ran for 2 6-month seasons, April to October 1964 and 1965, and exposed the public for the first time to things we take for granted now: computer terminals with keyboards, CRT displays, teletype machines, punch cards, and modems in an era when computer equipment was kept only in corporations and the government, and of course decades before the internet and home computers. Most of the buildings were modernist, influenced by freedom of form enabled by modern building materials, such as reinforced concrete, fiberglass, plastic, tempered glass, and stainless steel. Most prominent were towers and a pavilion designed by Philip Johnson, with engineering by Lev Zetlin.
Well, like myself, Mitch Silverstein attended the New York World's Fair as a child. After the fair ended, his brain filled with the bright hope of Star Trek, the original series, now over 50 years old. That futuristic combination solidified his career in the sciences, which continues today. Eventually, Mitch began collecting 1964 New York World's Fair items, souvenirs, artifacts, knowledge, and in 2009, he and John Pirro created the New York State Pavilion Paint Project, a volunteer group dedicated to maintaining the pavilion and towers through painting and other upkeep projects. For this, Mitch and John received the New York Mets Spirit Award in 2014.
Yay!
For over 10 years, the Paint Project group has largely spent their own money or gotten donations for paint to restore the structure and bring about its reuse. Finally, after years of lobbying, in November 2019, groundbreaking began for a $24 million partial restoration of the pavilion and towers.
Joining Mitch on that journey is Stephanie Bohn, a history enthusiast, an active volunteer with archaeological digs, a tour guide at historic sites, an advocate for historic preservation and restoration, and also a Star Trek fan. She joined the New York State Pavilion Paint Project in 2010.
Do you have to be a Mets fan, too?
I don't know. We'll have to find out. Stephanie and Mitch were featured in the documentary Modern Ruin, produced by our pal Matt Silva, detailing the site's post-fair use as a 60s concert venue, a 70s roller skating rink, and the subsequent deterioration and growing advocacy efforts. Welcome, Mitch and Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Oh, yeah, I'm so glad to have you both on the show. So I should tell everyone that I met Mitch and Stephanie when U.S. Modernist took a group to New York in the fall of 2019 to see exclusively Modernist sites. And one of the great pleasures we had was going out to the Queens Museum site where the World's Fair took place, and they took us around and showed us different things. Stephanie, before we talk about the 64 World's Fair, what happened in 1939? How did that World's Fair come about?
Well, it came about because Robert Moses actually wanted to create a great park in Queens, and he felt that this would be a springboard in order to raise money for that venture. Mitch, am I correct?
Yes, and it's interesting that he was basically responsible for building that fair back in '39 with an ends to have a beautiful park, and it didn't quite work out for him.
Right, it wasn't profitable enough to do so, so it never materialized, and that's why he wanted to try again with the 64 fair.
Oh, so he was involved in both?
Yes.
Yes, he was.
Robert Moses was one of the great government officials who created a number of highways and park systems throughout New York State.
Right.
Robert Caro, I think, wrote the huge biography of Moses 30-some years ago, The Power Broker, which is still in print.
And suffice to say that he's a little controversial.
He is. Of course, we appreciate him as the builder of a fair, but there are a lot of people who have a bad taste in their mouth about him.
How was the 1939 fair received? What was it like?
Well, the 39 fair was very popular. They did fall short of attendance, but architecture was all Art Deco 20s with a sort of common theme in the architecture. There was, like the latest fair, there were areas of industry, there was areas that had guest nations and an amusement zone. It did have the parachute jump, which is an iconic structure that's now in Cornell.
What is that?
Coney Island.
The parachute.
Oh, is that the same one at Coney Island?
Same one that's in Coney Island.
Oh.
Lifesavers was the sponsor for the original parachute jump in the amusement zone of the 39 World's Fair. They actually moved it between years because the fair went for 2 years also in 1939. And then after the fair, it went to Coney Island, where it's been ever since.
So tell us, what is that attraction?
It's a ride back then where you sat in a seat, a pair of people. There were, I think, maybe 8 positions around the tower, and it was modeled after the actual same towers that they used to train paratroopers. So they'd bring you up in a pair in small seats by cable all the way to the top, and then they would let you go on the cable, and you would free fall down on a parachute.
Oh,
on
right.
the cable.
I've seen,
very popular.
Big scale versions of that now at different amusement parks, but I guess back then it was what, like 30 feet tall or something?
Oh, I don't.
No, it was over 200 feet tall, maybe.
200?
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't.
That's so funny that it was sponsored by Lifesavers. A parachute and a lifesaver save lives in different ways.
Yes.
Maybe somebody realized that.
There was a giant lifesaver up on the tower, too, which was pretty cool.
Of course, it's not a ride anymore. That element has been removed from the tower, and it's just a tower now.
Oh,
at Coney Island.
Because of safety?
I would assume.
Yeah.
An 80-year-old ride probably needs a lot of maintenance.
That could be true.
Yes.
I know the Queen's Museum still survives from 1939, and I learned recently it was the early home of the United Nations. Tell us about that building.
That was the New York City building, actually for both fairs. It was built in 39. There was a ice skating rink inside, so they had ice shows during the fairs. In between fairs, it was host to the United Nations Pavilion while they were constructing the permanent home in Manhattan. I was there for a couple of years, and they had big plans for the park. They thought they would hopefully keep the United Nations there or develop the park based on that, but that didn't materialize either. So when the United Nations moved out, that building was just basically used for an ice skating rink.
Did other buildings from 1939 survive?
There is a boathouse down by the lake that was from the 39 fair. That was restored maybe 10 years ago, so that still exists on site. There's the Queen's Museum building. There's a pair of flagpoles that were on either side of the lagoon during the 39 fair, and then you relocated them to the front of the Pool of Industry, which is basically in the same area, and they still exist in the park. Especially for the 64 fair, we know way too much about all these little items that are left over, little things. We point...
Well, that's why we have you on the show, because you know way too much.
Way too much. There's a statue in the middle of the park now, in line part of the main mall area with the Unisphere. It's called the Rocket Thrower, and around the base of the Rocket Thrower, there's these tiered gardens. And the concrete that makes up these tiered gardens was originally from the 39 fair, and very few people realize that, too. But they're in really nice shape. They're beautiful. There was a giant statue of George Washington there during the 39 fair, which was a centerpiece. He sort of looked down at the Trilon and Perisphere in 39, but these little tiered areas are still existing from the 39 fair.
After United Nations was there temporarily, but before 64, what was going on at the site?
It was just sort of a leftover park that was not completed from the 39 fair. So it really was somewhat of a boring park.
Well, photographs sort of show it as almost a no man's land, just sort of
swampy,
not a fully realized, somewhat abandoned area.
There are photographs of the park with the grass like 2 feet tall and the paths broken up.
Like an abandoned lot.
Yeah, a lot of it was. I'm sure they went through and they cut the grass once in a while, and they tried to keep it up, basically, but there were really no amenities in the park at the time.
So it's 1964, actually it's earlier, and the decision has been made to have the fair there again, and this time it's a much larger fair, much more complicated and involved. How did all this come about?
Well, the same reason that Robert Moses was involved in the first fair is he wanted to realize a beautiful park in Queens. The way to do that, he figured, was to have another World's Fair. It was not a sanctioned World's Fair. 2 years before, in 62, there was a sanctioned fair in Seattle. So,
what does sanctioned mean?
Sanctioned, the International Expositions.
The BIE, I believe, is the name of the group.
Bureau of International Expositions.
Yeah, it's in French, I think, because it's based in France, and they sanctioned the World's Fair.
BIE.
BIE.
There you go. That's a more accurate accent.
Since the 64 fair didn't fall within the rules, and Robert Moses wanted to do more, he sort of went rogue and said, well, you know what, I'm having a fair anyway, and I'm going to invite who I want. And, there were certain countries that didn't come because it wasn't sanctioned, but he wanted to create a park, and he figured that there'd be profits and money made that would be able to go into the park when the fair was done. So late in the 50s, they started planning and designing and bringing in corporations.
And it was really spectacular on a scale that had not been seen before.
It was a very big undertaking. And Robert Moses was actually president of the Bridge and Tunnel Authority, I believe, at the time. And he left the public sector and was president of the World's Fair Corporation to have this fair made. He was not the original fair. I think he was still working for the city during the development of the 39 fair. But he totally went rogue, and he left the city and created the fair.
Now, Mitch, you were there in 1964. What do you remember? What were some of the outstanding exhibitions and things that got introduced to the public?
I remember bits and pieces. It was wonderful. The technology. I was 8 years old at the time. The technology would make a little kid's head spin. It was wonderful seeing computers and these larger than life pavilions and the lighting at night and the rides and mechanisms. And I sort of liked mechanical things, which a lot of boys and girls do when they're at a young age. And many rides like the IBM Pavilion, the People Wall, which was amazing. And I remember being on the little gangplanks over water while you're waiting to get onto this very steep amphitheater flat wall where people would sit. And the pavilion was this big, giant, egg-shaped pavilion. And once you sat on this wall and the ride began, they would bring this whole set of seats up inside the egg, and you would watch movies. And I was just fascinated by the mechanism. I was concerned that it wasn't sturdy as a kid, because that's how kids are sometimes.
Here, kid, try this parachute jump instead.
Yeah. That's probably why they don't want parachutes on there anymore.
Right.
But the IBM Pavilion was amazing. And, you had the pavilions by Disney, like Carousel of Progress. GE sponsored that, which still exists in the Disney parks. And Walt Disney World has the original mechanisms for that. And, it was amazing that you would sit, and it's a round theater, but the seats would move around instead of the stage turning in the middle, which is what you would think would happen. But then the seats moved, and you're sitting there, and it's amazing. Ford Pavilion, you got to sit in the Mustang, or a new Ford vehicle and go through it. So it was really a spectacle and amazing, especially for kids.
Now, you were there, Tom. What do you remember?
I was there in 65. I was 11. And I remember a lot of what you're saying, that you would ride through past things. And the problem is that later on I was at Disney World, and I can't remember what I saw there and what I saw at the World's Fair, but I do remember seeing a push-button telephone, and one of those picture phone gadgets. And also, strangely, for an 11-year-old, I remember seeing the Pieta, the famous sculpture that is now in St. Peter's in Rome, in Vatican City.
Michelangelo.
There was some walkway that took you by it very slowly. And the Kodak Pavilion had this moonscape on the roof. And it was really cool. You go up there, and it was sort of stylized. And the idea was you go up there and get out your Instamatic camera and take pictures of your family. Except the time that I was there was pouring rain, so that was scratched. But otherwise, it was just fantastic.
Mitch, how many people do you think attended the 64-65 World's Fair, roughly?
I believe the number was 51 million.
Wow.
Over the 2 years.
And that's at a time when America was how many people? 200 million, maybe?
Maybe not even, yeah.
Yeah, maybe not even. And they had that, too. I think it was at the Life Pavilion. They had a counter, a digital counter.
Really? That's right.
Showing the population of the United States, and it was counting up all the time. So
right.
That was pretty fascinating.
Later got repurposed for the national debt. Probably not.
Most likely.
But that's a good story.
Yeah.
We can start that rumor.
Sure.
What happened to the buildings, Stephanie? Because you've got an incredible investment of all these pavilions and support buildings and things like that, and there's not a whole lot left now at the park. So where did all the buildings go?
They were actually built to be temporary, most of them, and they had arrangements with all of the participants to dismantle them after the fair except for key buildings that it was decided upon that they were going to be kept, like the New York State Pavilion. Originally, it wasn't going to be kept, but they had decided during construction that they did want to keep it. I believe that was when they had added steel pilings to the towers because they wanted to ensure that they endured. And obviously the Queens Museum building, that was going to be kept, and they had decided to keep the U.S. Pavilion, which was sort of where the USTA is now, one of the stadiums.
The tennis,
yeah. That unfortunately didn't endure. That sort of fell apart and was taken down, I believe, sometime in the 70s. There was also the Hall of Science. The Hall of Science was to be kept as well, and that's currently the Hall of Science in the park. It's like a science center.
Is that the one that's next to the pavilion?
It's across the highway from the museum. It's sort of like near the zoo. There's the zoo and the carousel on that side. It was the transportation area.
Well, what's the building that you took us by near the pavilion?
We took you into the base of the towers of the...
Right, and there were buildings right adjacent to it.
That was the Theaterama, which is also part... That
was part of the New York State Pavilion complex. Yeah, it was comprised of three elements, the towers, the Theaterama, and the Tent of Tomorrow, which is the rotunda there.
The Tent of Tomorrow?
Yeah.
Yes.
So for people that don't really know quite what we're talking about with the pavilion, you've probably seen the movie Men in Black, which was 20 years ago now, with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. And the headquarters for the Men in Black organization were these towers in New York that were all lit up and CGI'd for the movie. But those are actually real buildings. You can see them from the highway going by. You can see them from all over the place, particularly on a clear day.
Too CGI because they pretty much look like that.
Yeah.
But little fancy.
They fixed them up a little bit so they weren't quite as rusted and...
Right. Plus you could go inside them in the movie.
Or underneath them.
Yeah, right.
And there was an arena area, which was the Tent of Tomorrow. And then next to it were these towers. You could go on elevators, and you could go up to the top. There were, I think, 2 observation decks, right, Mitch?
There were 3 decks.
3 decks.
Yes, there was a lower deck that was about 60 feet off the ground. The next one was 80-something feet, but the top tower was 226 feet high. So the lowest tower was a VIP deck, which had an enclosure inside so they could take dignitaries and important people up there. You didn't quite get the restful view from the highest tower, but it was air-conditioned and heated, and it was nice. The second deck, which was closer to the top, was not used very often. There's many photographs of the pavilion with that layer empty and no people up there, but the upper deck was a double-decker observation deck, two levels that the elevator went up to express. There were 2 elevators on either side of the column of the tallest tower. One would stop at the lower 2 towers, and then one went express to the top. And the view was spectacular up there, and we hope that one day people will be able to see that view again.
And this was at a time when people were building towers. The Seattle Space Needle had been completed a couple of years before?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's true. That was done before. The reason why the New York State Pavilion has towers, though, is an interesting story. We've seen some very early drawings that did not have towers. Governor Rockefeller at the time, the governor of New York, wanted the New York State representation at the fair to be the grandest. So one way of being the grandest is to be the tallest.
Get me some towers.
So they gave him some tower, and he was happy with that.
And the architects for this were Philip Johnson, and the engineer was Lev Zetlin, is that right?
Yes.
And this was quite an accomplishment, particularly on the engineering side, to create this, and they created as fast as they did.
It was.
Yeah, and they did some techniques that were somewhat new for that era, like the slip-form concrete columns. The Tent of Tomorrow has 16 100-foot-tall concrete columns. These hold up a very large elliptical steel crown. Inside the crown were tension cables that was designed by Lev Zetlin, and it was the largest suspension roof at the time.
Wow.
Very shortly after, about the same time, they designed a similar ceiling for Madison Square Garden, which is also done by cables with a compression ring and a tension ring. But what was interesting about this is they built the columns and then they constructed this truss elliptical crown on the ground and then jacked them up using jacks on the inside edges of these columns. And jacked it up into place and then welded some cantilever steel to hold it on top of the columns. And luckily, it's still up there.
I remember the first time I saw the pavilion was in the early 80s, and I was driving a pickup truck from North Carolina to New York, and I saw these things on the side of the road. I guess it would have been the left-hand side of the road because I was heading north. I had to stop the car. And this was like just the most amazing thing I had ever physically witnessed. And my wife at the time thought I had lost my mind. But
Why are you pulling over the side of the road? We're in the middle of New York.
Right. And I just had to get out, and I lobbied unsuccessfully to take an hour break and go see these things. But I remember just sitting there staring at them like some kind of mystic force had taken me over. And so I'm sharing this story with you because it seems like there is a mystic force that takes over people like the two of you in terms of the allure of this place. Is that right?
It does have that effect, 100%.
Like Stonehenge.
Yes. I had the same exact reaction the first time I saw it. I was awestruck by it. Because, of course, I was born 4 years too late to attend the fair, but because I'm a huge fan of history and historic preservation, and after I had met Mitch and he, told me about the project, of course it was right up my alley, and I traveled out there to see it. And just getting out of the car and witnessing it for the first time was unlike any experience I've had.
Yeah, I mean, they're still visible now. I think I was in New York this past year, and I forget which highway it is, but they're on the left side as you're going, north, and they're pretty eye-catching. I mean, New York's full of eye-catching architecture, but nothing like this.
And it's certainly iconic now. It's become part of the Queens skyline for many different angles, and obviously you can see it from
many different highways. Yeah.
Okay.
For your group, which we'll talk about in a minute, do you get these kinds of wide-eyed phone calls or emails where people have caught on to the mysticism of this and want to help?
Well, what's interesting is twofold to that. One is, yes, people want to help, which we can get to in a second, but there's also a lot of the local people that use the park, because it's definitely the backyard for that area in Queens. They're not aware. A lot of these are immigrants that have come to that area long after the fair is gone. So they have very little knowledge of the fair, and they see this big, huge building there. So it's perfect timing that if we're there working, doing our volunteer work, they'll come up and we'll have conversations with people that grew up in the neighborhood and just always wondered what it was, and we're happy to tell them all about it. And they're
because they are nonetheless drawn to it, regardless of what they may or may not know about it. They are drawn to it because they want to know what it is or was. And, of course, we're happy to tell them. But it happens to us all the time when we're working.
There's a riveting draw from these structures just because of the architecture itself. I'm wondering, Mitch and Stephanie, is there any correlation? And I have a sample size of 3 that says yes, but I'll just ask you this question. Is there any correlation between Star Trek fans and World's Fair fans?
Of course there is. Of course. Like you mentioned in the intro, after going to the fair, in 1966 I saw the Beatles at Shea Stadium, which is part of this complex, basically, the home of the Mets. And they played Shea Stadium 65 and 66. I got to go with my family in 1966.
Oh, man.
66 was after the fair, but when I went to Shea Stadium to see the Beatles, the fair was being dismantled. There was cranes, there was steel, there was dust, there were piles of debris. It was heartbreaking. I was 8 years old by then, but it was heartbreaking after having such a wonderful time at the fair and such great memories. So once the excitement of the Beatles wore off, I had a void. Where's my technical void? And Star Trek came along at the same time. And, I remember getting punished. I don't know what I did, but I was punished one time where I couldn't watch Star Trek on a Friday night.
That was awful.
That was awful. I think that if I still remember that, it obviously was awful.
So how many years of therapy have you been in?
That probably happened in 67. I think since then I've been in therapy. The technology and the hope that Star Trek gave was a very similar message to what you get out of that World's Fair in 64 and 65.
That optimism that you talk about really was a key element for me as a Star Trek fan. Because for those of you that have never watched the original series with William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, our planet had kind of gotten its act together and had allied with other planets to form the United Federation. And we're flying around the galaxy exploring things and dealing with civilizations that are beyond our knowledge. So it presumed that we had overcome war and famine and disease and international conflict and all of that, which had never really been presented before, except maybe in tiny little short stories on Playhouse 90 or Twilight Zone or something else like that. And if you're a true Star Trek fan, you know that the series was not very popular and eventually got canceled after 3 seasons.
Yeah, at the time that it was on.
Yeah.
But
And then when it went into syndication, it just went nuclear. Or as George Bush would say, nuclear. It went nuclear, and all of a sudden everybody's watching it and going, conventions start coming up, and it takes on this whole life of its own.
well, the optimism that infuses Star Trek and modernist design is welcomed now a lot more in these depressing times. But maybe at the time, it wasn't so obvious.
Right. And I read recently that actor Ben Stiller is a huge Star Trek fan and has all this paraphernalia from the original series. Like, there were only a couple of the Gorn masks that were ever made for that particular episode. And we won't go into the details. You can Google this if you don't know the Gorn episode. But do celebrities gravitate to the pavilion site? Do you see them walking around?
Not as much as we would like. It would be really fantastic if there were more celebrities who could get behind the idea of preserving it and restoring it. But there have been bands that have used it, like say in music videos. There have been TV shows even that have filmed scenes in it. But it's generally sort of a backdrop. It isn't like a passion like it is with some of us. But we thought it would be really great we were just shooting in the dark and saying, wouldn't it be great if we could get, like, say, for example, Billy Joel or somebody to have a concert there, in support of restoring it.
Could happen still. You never know. Wow.
It would be quite a coup. But as far as we're aware, we don't really see too many celebrities lobbying behind it.
Well, Mitch, Stephanie, George has just wandered off because I think he's going to go look on eBay again for Gorn masks. So while he does that, we're going to have a moment of reflection with Nietzsche.
Beauty, love, durability, designed to last for years to come, bringing you peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good. And you love feeling this good. Nietzsche, 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 Nietzsche. Say it with me. Nietzsche. Advanced engineering. Nietzsche, Nietzsche. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit Nietzsche.com/US Modernist. Nietzsche, Nietzsche, Nietzsche. That's N-I-C-H. Wait for it. A look you'll love. Nietzsche.
We are back, and I did not get the Gorn mask. I lost out. I know. So, Mitch, it's 2009, and you wake up in the morning, and something possesses you to start a group. Tell us about that.
There's a community of World's Fair enthusiasts, not just New York World's Fair, but mostly New York World's Fair, that has been online on forums since about the year 2000. Now, we even met in the park at one time in 2000 and did a tour or whatever. But we've been conversing online for many, many years, everything about the fair. Anything anybody knows, collectibles, pavilions, locations of where pavilions went, stories of the fair, everything, soup to nuts, for many years. And about the year 2000, there was a group, architect and enthusiasts, one guy that actually worked at the skating rink in the 70s. They got together and they came up with a plan to convert the New York State Pavilion to an Air and Space Museum. So it was beautiful, it was nice, it was a great idea. They took it to the city, and the city totally balked on it. And that, after a few years, that faded. So we, as a group online, were frustrated that the last and only remaining neglected piece of the World's Fair on the fairgrounds was the New York State Pavilion. And we wanted to do something about it. John Pirro came up with an idea, what can we do? It's within our means to do, and put a coat of paint on it. It was, during the fair, it was red and white stripes on the 10th of tomorrow. It was canvas panels. Obviously, those panels are gone, and for many years, the whole pavilion was just white, which was the paint that was underneath the panels. In the mid-'90s, manager of the Queen's Theater, which is one of the elements of the pavilion, got a grant and got some students and whatever, and they painted stripes to mimic what the original canvas panels were. Paint was not even as good back then when they did it, so it faded fast and was peeling and the metal's rusting. So it sat for many years with no attention whatsoever. And when John came up with the idea to paint it, he put out the APB online. He said, I'm going to be there on the 2nd. Anybody want to help? And only one person was able to make it, and that was me. So John and I showed up. We did one section in stripes. He went to the Parks Commissioner, which was Estelle Cooper at the time, and said that I have an idea. I want to preserve the pavilion. I want to do whatever I can, and we'll paint. And she sort of said, that sounds like a good idea. She never really said yes, go ahead and do it. But we went ahead and we did it anyway. And painstakingly, for the first few stripes, we strung chalk lines and we put tape and we made beautiful stripes. And we spent, I think, 9 hours. We did like 6 stripes. We stepped back and we looked at this giant building and said, oh my God, we're going to need help.
How long are these stripes you're trying to paint?
They're about 12 feet tall. It's on cinder block, so it's not the easiest thing to paint. They're red and white stripes. We learned the hard way that the white covers the red much better than the red covering the white. So when we did our scenes, we learned the hard way that it's best to do the red first. And after that day, and Estelle finally saw it, and she flipped out at first, but then she said it looks really nice. We had some more help, and we threw out the chalk line and the tape, and we just eyeballed some straight lines. That way we were able to get the pavilion done. But it started out with just the two of us the first couple of days, and we had people sending us money for donation to buy some paint, but a lot of the paint was donated in the early days. There was a program. Sherwin-Williams had a program where you can go to your local Sherwin-Williams, tell them a project you have, and they can decide whether they want to give you paint. So we got a lot of the red and white paint donated in the early days. And then it was history from there. After a couple of trips on our own, we gathered a core group of people that made it consistently. And we started going around the building. Yep.
Stephanie, you got involved in this in 2010. Were you just like walking by, or how did you get involved with these crazy people?
Well, I had met Mitch through another hobby of ours, unrelated to the historic preservation.
You have time for another hobby?
Yes, believe it or not. Yes, we were very interested in the concept of the paranormal for some time.
Okay.
And became interested in traveling to different purportedly haunted locations, and he and I had met through that. And but I told him my primary love was the history of these places, and he told me about this project, and I had volunteered for many projects of that same vein, so it, of course, interested me just in concept. And then once I saw the building and saw that it was unlike anything I had ever seen, I became obsessed obsessed with helping out. But they started in November of 2009, and I joined in May of 2010.
Did Mitch ever try to convince you that there were other spirits floating around the New York Pavilion?
We believe that there are.
You do?
Or I do. I do. I can't really speak for Mitch, but you can just, I don't know, feel it. There's just, I think it was a happy place for a lot of people.
Okay.
Personally, I believe there's a Romulan bird of prey with a cloaking device parked on the grass, but that's just me.
Do you want me to look again for that Gorn mask?
I keep tripping over something in the grass. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So a couple of years go by, and then our friend Matt Silva comes along and wants to make a movie. What was that all about?
Yeah, that was very nice. That was exciting. We were working for many years towards a goal of completing a coat of paint on the inside and the outside of the mezzanine level. Sometime while we were working on the inside, Matthew came by and told us about the group that they were starting called People's Pavilion. They're very interested in the work that we were doing. And as an offshoot of that, I think he's a teacher and he does visual arts, and so he wanted to make this movie about it because he used to see the pavilion when he was a child, didn't know what it was, and was fascinated. And we said, sure, we're game. We'd love to help you out. And he came one day and filmed us and interviewed us for the movie while we were doing the paint day on the inside, which was a lot of fun. Another goal we were after, we wanted to open the gates to let the public in after all of our hard work on the anniversary of the opening day, the 50th anniversary of the opening day of the World's Fair, which was April 22nd, 1964. It opened. So we wanted to open the gates on April 22nd, 2014. It wasn't a small feat because we didn't own the building. We did have the combination to the gate, which was very nice. We had a very good relationship with Parks that we got the combination to the gate. Actually, we bought the lock and told them the combination, which was very cool. But we wanted to open the gates on that day, which was a Tuesday morning. So we figured on a Tuesday morning. See, I'm sort of going on a tangent a little bit away from Matthew, but he was there to film this and captured this in his film, too.
Yeah, it's in the movie.
Yes, it's in the movie. And Tuesday morning, we figured, we put it on social media. We started getting media coverage. We had all the different local TV contacting us. Wall Street Journal came down and did a whole interview on it for a day and a lovely video piece. New York Times, CNN. The media coverage was crazy that we were going to be opening the gates for a few hours for the pavilion. But we still thought of as, social media, we had maybe, how many responses did we get? 900 maybe?
I thought we would get about 90, but we got about 1,000, and we were freaking out a little bit about that, but of course,
then what happened?
About 5,000 people showed up.
Yeah, maybe 5,000
something like
people.
that.
Oh.
Yeah.
We couldn't get everybody in to see it because we had to give out hard hats. That's what the parks wanted us to do, which was a good idea because the building still had parts of it crumbling. But there were literally close to 5,000 people in the park. We got about 2,000 people through. But I think it was really, truly an amazing day because even though people didn't get in, I think everybody knew they were part of the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. We showed...
It showed that there was a lot of love going around, love and interest going around about the building, as evidenced by the number of people that showed up. I mean, the building had been closed to the public since the 80s, and we just... Well, I say us, but it really took John. John Pirro was talking with Parks about opening the gate, and he negotiated with them for about 2 weeks. I remember it taking a while before they gave us approval, and they gave us approval to do it, but only in a limited viewing area, so we had barricaded off a section just inside the gate, and still that many people showed up just because they wanted to get a glimpse inside, and we felt that with the coat of paint that we had placed on it, that it was possible to envision it repurposed, and we just wanted the public to see that. And I think that was the general consensus from that day.
Well, the next year, a bridge painting company got involved. What was going on with that?
That was actually wonderful. Head of Ahern Painting is the company that did the painting on that, and they paint all the bridges in New York City. The owner, Timothy Ahern, I believe, was inspired actually by our work, which, moved us beyond measure. I mean, us inspiring anybody is, gravy for our efforts. It was amazing. So he went to Parks. It took them, though, 2 to 3 years to convince Parks that they're willing to put over $3 million into a paint job on the top, the metal crown that I spoke about earlier, which we couldn't reach with our paint poles, or we would have done it ourselves. They have the means to paint it, and they finally convinced Parks, and they did that. They closed off access to the pavilion, and they weren't up there for several weeks, and they were originally going to train their apprentices using this instead of on a bridge, and it was actually very complicated, and they wanted to get it done faster, so they had people, they were all getting paid by Ahern, but they had people volunteering to go on this job, bridge painters to volunteer because they wanted to be a part of this.
Because if you can paint this, you can paint any bridge.
But this is iconic. The bridges are iconic too, but they wanted to be involved in this project, which was, donated to the city. It didn't cost the city anything. And I think it came out to about $3.25 million worth of material and labor.
Thank you, Ahern.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
He said he had attended the fair and was a fair fan, so it gave him pleasure to see the building spruced.
It gave him pleasure to see the building, but unfortunately he passed away actually before they finished painting the crown. His son was basically vice president and was running the company anyway, and he made sure it was finished. And it was a wonderful thing.
Thank you, Ahern Jr.
Yes, it's great, beautiful.
Last year, the city, I guess the borough, came up with a lot of money to start restoring the pavilion. What's going to be happening with that? What's going to get fixed up, and what's going to be left for the future?
Well, the money that they have now is going to be mostly put towards the towers. The goal here is to light up the pavilion, light up the 10th of tomorrow and the towers, so it becomes more of that iconic structure that it should be. We mentioned the parachute jump in Coney Island. It's just a tower, but what they did is there's a light show on the thing. It lights up, and it's something to be seen. It's part of the landscape, the skyline there. So they want to do the same thing with the New York State Pavilion. To get it lit, though, it needs some certain amount of work. There's also, since the LaGuardia Airport is right next to the park, there's a red beacon on top of the tallest tower. And you can't get up there easily because the stairs inside these towers are all rusted. Several years back, 10, 12 years ago, they did repair the stairs temporarily, but they still hire somebody that hooks themselves with ropes and practically rappels up inside this tower to get to the roof to change the light. So they want to replace the stairs. They want to do some concrete work where, maybe some little pieces are missing on the concrete. They want to replace the cables. These towers, each deck is actually cantilevered and hung by cables off the concrete tower. So they want to replace those cables. They want to fix the plaza at the base of these towers. They want to resurface it. They want to paint and fix the plaza at the base. And most of all, they want to waterproof the basement. Underneath the towers is the basement where the electrical switchgear is, and also where there used to be the motors that ran the elevators. Those motors have been ransacked many years ago to take the copper out. But they're going to redo the electrical down there so they can use that electric to light the towers in the 10th. So all this is part of a $24 million bundle that they have right now, and they had a groundbreaking ceremony. When was that?
Back in November.
Yes, so we had a little groundbreaking ceremony. They invited us, which was very nice. People for the pavilion was there, and the media was there, and all the Queensboro president was there. The Parks Department representation, obviously the news media was there. And we did a little groundbreaking ceremony to kick it off. I don't believe any work has started yet, but it's in the queue. And we're remaining very hopeful.
Mitch and Stephanie, how can people either donate to your project or volunteer to help?
We have on our website, if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a little envelope icon. If you click that, it's a way to email us.
And what's the website?
nyspproject.org.
nyspproject.org. Okay.
And if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a little email icon. If you click that, you will email us. We'll get the email if you want to volunteer with us or if you have any questions about the project or the work. And we also have a GoFundMe page because initially when the group first started, we took donations from fair fans and funded a lot of it ourselves. But after it had gone on for some time, we decided to open it up to everyone, and it's been successful. But we have a button on the main page of our website. If you click it, I believe it says donate. If you click it, it takes you directly to the GoFundMe page, and that's the way that you can donate to us. We keep very good records with the GoFundMe, and Mitch puts together some nice progress reports that we put up on the website so everyone sees exactly what the money is being used for.
Well, Mitch, Stephanie, this has been really fascinating, and thank you so much for coming on the show and getting together, and I can't wait to see how all this restoration turns out.
Yes, us too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yep, and thanks.
It's the skyline.
I hope you come out to the park again soon. We'll
We would love that.
be there. We'd love to see you guys again out there, and you're happy to give another tour.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist takes architecture fans to the Pavilion as well as other modernist sites in New York. Check out our tours, proceeds of which underwrite our documentation and preservation programs at usmodernist.org/tours. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for modernist houses, and by Nichiha.com/US Modernist. Okay, Tom, take us out.
U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. We record at Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Guest research conducted by She Who Cannot Be Named.
Yes.
That's all it says here. Visit usmodernist.org's massive modernist archives to hear past shows, discover 7,000 mid-century houses, and access 2.7 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. Plus, you can get on our newsletter list for exciting modernist tours. Contact George at george@usmodernist.org or on Instagram at mr.modernism. I'm Tom Geil. George and I'll be back soon with another live long and prosper edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
Make it so, number 2.